Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to Shloka a day. So today we're going to begin a new chapter and a new section of the Bhagavad Gita as well. We have completed the first six chapters, and the first six chapters primarily dealt with the topic of Jivatma, which is the Atma, the soul. So the Lord had to shift Arjuna's focus away from his body to his soul, and then in the perspective of the soul, how one can go about making decisions. Of course, the Lord has introduced himself as well, but the focus of the first six chapters is not the Supreme Lord, it's actually the Jivatma. So now, entering the middle six chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the middle six chapters are called Bhakti Yoga. Now, in chapter 3, Krishna has offered Arjuna an opportunity to work for him. And in this chapter, from this chapter onwards, the focus shifts away from Atma to Paramatma. So if we have to work for somebody, we need to know who that somebody is. And why would I be interested in working for Krishna? So in this particular section, the middle six chapters, beginning with the seventh chapter, we are going to actually look at how Krishna begins to speak about himself, first of all as Paramatma, and eventually by the time you reach chapter 12, he speaks about himself as Bhagavan. So it begins with Paramatma and concludes with Bhagavan. So it's almost as if these middle six chapters are like a candidate asking questions about who the boss is. Candidate trying to get to know more about the boss. So this chapter 7, the Lord introduces himself as the boss of everyone and everything. So we will look at Shloka 1, but let's also look at the overall theme of chapter 7. So the meaning of sacrifice means we have to give up something little for something greater. So this entire chapter begins with the Lord describing the material and the spiritual dimensions of the Lord's various Shakti potencies. One of the most famous analogy that the Lord uses in this chapter is that just like a thread is required to make a necklace of beads, similarly, all these Shakti potencies of the Lord are like those little beads, but they are hanging on the thread, and the thread itself is the Supreme Lord. Without that thread, that lovely bead necklace would not exist. So what is visible to you and me are the beads strung on the thread. We don't see the thread. The thread is obscured by the beads. So Krishna is saying, you have been interacting with my energies, but you don't realize I am behind all of those energies. So to understand this thread that is holding all these Shakti potency together, the Lord begins to describe not just his energies, but eventually himself, indicating that the entire creation begins and ends, begins with him and dissolves back into him. And in this chapter, Krishna also says that although it is very difficult to overcome the influence of Maya, he does make it clear that there is a way out of this prison, which is anybody who surrenders to him can easily cross over the influence of illusion by the Lord's grace. So you will notice that this chapter begins with a description of material and spiritual energies of the Lord. And then later on, Krishna will confirm that he is the ultimate truth and he is the highest authority. There is nobody above him and there is nobody equal to him. And to prove his point, he talks about his various potencies, that he is omnipotent, that he is omnipresent, he is omniscient. But how his Yogamaya potency actually hides these potencies of his from those who are not his devotees. That means only those who surrender to the Supreme Lord can actually understand his potencies, can actually receive this divine knowledge from the Supreme Lord. In chapter 6, in the last shloka, the Lord clearly concluded that of all the yogis, his bhaktas were the topmost. So here, how do you get to know the Supreme Lord is the question. So the Lord himself begins speaking in this particular chapter. Arjuna is not asking any questions here. So please recite after me. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha.
Shri Bhagavan
Uvacha
Maya Saktamanaf Partha.
Maya
Saktamana
Yogam Yunjanmadashrayah.
Yogam
Janmadashraya
Asamshayam Samagram Mam.
Asamshayam Samagram Mam
Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha.
Shri Bhagavan
Uvacha
Maya Saktamanaf Partha.
Maya
Saktamana Partha
Yogam Yunjanmadashrayah.
Yogam Yunjanmadashraya
Asamshayam Samagram Mam.
Asamshayam
Samagram Mam
Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha.
Shri
Bhagavan Uvacha
Maya Saktamanaf Partha.
Maya
Saktamana Partha
Yujjanmadashrayah.
Yogam
Yogam Yunjanmadashraya
Samshayam Samagram Mam.
Asamshayam
Samagram Mam
Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Word for word meaning and translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha.
Shri
Bhagavan
Bhagavan
Uvacha.
The Supreme Lord said,
The Supreme Lord
Lord said,
Mai,
Mahi
to me,
to me,
Asakta Manaha,
Asakta Manaha
mind attached,
Mind attached
Partha,
Partha
O son of Pratha,
O son
O son of Pratha,
Yogam,
Yogam,
self-realization,
self-realization,
Yunjan,
Yunjan
Yunjan,
practicing,
practicing
Matashrayah,
Matashrayah,
in consciousness of me,
in consciousness
consciousness of me,
Krishna consciousness,
Krishna consciousness,
Asamshayam,
Asamshayam,
doubt,
without
without doubt,
Samagram,
Samagram,
completely,
completely,
Mam,
Mam,
me,
me,
Yatha,
Yatha,
how, Vyasyasi,
Nyasyasi,
you can know,
you can know,
that,
that
that,
Shunu,
Shunu,
try to hear.
try to hear.
Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said,
the Supreme
Supreme Personality of Godhead said,
now hear, O son of Pritha,
now
now
here
hear, son of Pritha,
how by practicing yoga
how
by practicing yoga
in full consciousness of me,
in
in full consciousness of me,
with mind attached to me,
mind
mind attached to me,
you can know me in full,
you
you
can
can know me in full,
free from doubt.
free
doubt.
from doubt.
So, this particular shloka is one of the most often cited verses by Srila Prabhupada. Actually, if you look at all the recordings of Prabhupada's classes, maximum number of classes are on this one verse. Essentially, what is Krishna saying here? By hearing, you will come to know me and you will make spiritual advancement. Hearing increases our attraction towards Krishna. Hearing is one of the 9 limbs of bhakti, one of the first and foremost limbs, as Prahlad speaks about in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Prahlad Maharaj describes the 9 limbs of bhakti: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Padasevanam. So Shravanam is so important. And Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that everything begins with hearing. Our learning begins with hearing, right from when we are in the womb. So hearing is the predominant path by which we can make advancement in spiritual practice. As we said in the last shloka of the 6th chapter, the Lord has said that the yogi who thinks about him all the time is the topmost yogi. So now in this chapter, Krishna is essentially explaining that somebody who's always thinking about him and hearing about him ultimately becomes very attached to Krishna. So it's only natural that we get attached to something. We have developed affection or attraction for something the more we hear about that particular aspect. For example, Rukmini has never met Krishna, but just hearing about the pastimes of the Lord, she develops a deep affection for the Lord. Similarly, the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a chapter on the prayers of the wives of the Brahmanas in the forests who are doing all these great fire sacrifices. They too have never seen Krishna, but just hearing about him, they were so attracted to the Lord. They developed deep affection for the Lord. So the flow of this shloka is actually, you have to look at the flow of the shloka from 6 different aspects here. The first word, Shrinu, actually, which is the last, coming in reverse. So I'm going to look at the chapter in the particular shloka in reverse. Shrinu, by hearing what will happen, we develop attraction for Krishna. Jnasyasi samagram. We will get to know about Krishna properly. We will know Krishna completely, samagram. And when will we know about Krishna properly? What will happen? Asamshayam, will become free from doubts. So the more we hear about the Lord, the more knowledge our increases and the doubts decrease. The more knowledge you acquire, it should reduce your doubts. So your doubts get clarified, they get removed, and through that process, you are actually being purified because your faith in Krishna is increasing. Ashrayaha. When your doubts are removed, you are comfortable taking the shelter of the Supreme Lord. That the Lord is your greatest well-wisher. And He is the object of your love. So if somebody is the object of your love, then naturally you will want to take their shelter. Ashraya, Mad Ashraya. So Krishna is saying, you will take my shelter. Once all your doubts are removed, you will only take my shelter and nobody else's shelter. No mixed, I will worship this, that, and the other. One single personality you will worship, which is Krishna. Yogam Yunjan. So this taking shelter of Krishna is not just something abstract. It is practical. Yogam Yunjan means we begin to practice devotional service. And then coming to the first word in the verse, Asakta Manaha. So what happens when we practice devotional service? Your mind. Remember, the entire 6th chapter was about trying to control the mind. So Krishna is saying here, once your mind becomes attached to me, then you don't have to worry. There's nothing else that's going to distract you. So this is the process. By hearing about Krishna, our doubts get clarified and your mind gets attached. After you get to know about Krishna in full, you are clear that this is the only God that you want to worship, and there's nobody else left for us to take shelter of, except for the Supreme Lord.